Hi everyone, thank you for being here and for having me in this session. I've touched on things in common as a variant of boundary objects in quite a few conferences, but this is the first time I'll discuss it in a conference of science and technology studies, the birthplace of boundary objects, so it is especially exciting for me. We have limited time, so I'll jump right into condensed case studies, summarizing definitions as I go to show what I mean by the mutations I mentioned in my abstract. I hope this will stimulate some questions that we could discuss afterwards. Objects can initiate social assemblage. I discovered this early as a practitioner working with art objects for more than 2 decades. Different objects have different initiating capacities, but I have witnessed repeatedly how viewers gather around an art object. Even if only between the art object with a single viewer, a sort of exchange would start, and even for only a moment, a social assemblage is formed. At this point, the object can become similar to a wild thing, as described by Judy Atfield. Like wild cards in a set of cards, they can be conceptually used by different actors in the assemblage according to their respective takes. I have deliberately developed my work to amplify these moments of social assemblage so that the art objects can become a container for social networks. It feels unfortunate to leave them just when they begin to gather differences. My methods for this were to principally help viewers become participants. These include performances, where participants are encouraged to touch and modify the art objects, personalizing these objects to the extent that an ownership is developed, at which point they can then bring these art objects home as mementos. However, in contrast with the white cube space, where social scripts are limited, public performances contain more diverse participants, bringing in more varied cultural repertoires. The social scripts here is in the sense of Jeffrey Alexander's cultural pragmatics. When art objects strengthened with performance are brought outside of the white cube, art objects will rely more on aesthesis in their initiation capacities. And what I mean by aesthesis here can be partly defined in terms of Alfred Gell's art as technology of enchantment. Although I would replace Gell's enchantment of technology with Jeffrey Alexander's iconic consciousness. So, an aesthetic object is a symbolically condensed social meaning in material form, which attracts and strongly captivates human senses because there is something in excess of the visible. To simplify it even more, aesthetic is the opposite of anesthetic, that substance were given on an operating theater to numb our senses. So the presence of the art objects, or rather their mutation now, the aesthetic objects, becomes an aesthetic portal into a social assemblage in the circumstances of everyday life where social scripts are more unpredictable.
Can I do that? Yes, yeah. That's like a
Perfect.
My workshop Performance Make Your Own Passport, for example, has been staged in public places where people are usually visually alert, like shopping malls. So the iconic assemblages colorful passport making kits initially act as visceral portals that catch unsuspecting passers-by. At this point, again, aesthetic objects are like Atfield's wild things. Extreme responses include anger from a man who aggressively accused me of people smuggling, which I will return to later. The function of aesthetics perhaps stops there. A few words are contained in a bit longer. Seeds of hybridity emerge. Objects now tease out the varying interpretations. As passers-by become participants, the aesthetic objects become similar to boundary objects, an object that distinct social actors can associate with and connect through while maintaining plurality. They allow different groups to work together without consensus. Each participant, a social actor already contained within the social performance, finds different associations depending on their respective cultural repertoires. To describe it through Alexander's cultural pragmatics, the social actors infer the performance's script, gleaning a script upon which the performance must have been based. These performances, however, sustain even further. The process of working on the passports together transforms them into being binders for conversations between unexpectedly diverse participants. The following selection of handwritten reflection in English is a small part of these conversations. I have not thought so much about the differences in status between countries, as I have a high status citizenship, Sweden. I realized that I was downgraded when I got a Chinese passport here, but I am very happy that I got citizenship at all. I could have drawn stateless. Very interesting. Thank you. Very nice and mindful moment to use your hands and concentrate on making a passport, and during which you have time to think and exchange with the other passport makers next to you. I didn't know people were stateless, actually. Invaluable to get to hear the experiences and situation of someone currently living in Sweden with stateless status, to hear his story, his plans, how Swedish law has affected him, and ambitions. I have been thinking about citizenship a lot lately with the presidential election and applying for a green card for my husband. This artwork helped me process my feeling and feel less alone. Talking about our views of the world drew each of us, all very different people, together organically. At this point, the passports are not the boundary object anymore. Unlike the unboundary object that work without consensus, with this new object, a reorganizing of perspectives has begun to happen. While a boundary object is a common thing that is disinterested in consensus, these passports have become something in common, shared between the participants, initiating a reassembling. I will also return to reassembling later. This is the point where the objects within an assemblage bring out and begin to cultivate hybridity. At the end of each human participant's engagement with the workshop performance, they would have made their very own randomized passport booklet that they can take home. A new personalized object is born as a material reminder of the exchange of different worldviews, where participants, as one reflected, learned a lot and had got a nice memento. These mementos, moments of hybridization made material, are iconic and even personally iconic. As iconic objects, they will continue transforming to be wild things or boundary object. While on a former participant's bookshelf, or in a handbag, or as a notebook used to jot down someone's thoughts, because, to follow Sarah Ahmed, affect is sticky, a glue that binds ideas, values, and objects. Well, how does this process take place? I think of these mutations as micro shifts of objects' identities. In Stuart Hall's two modes of identity production, the necessary and impossible. The necessary discovers the common historical experiences, but a fully constituted identity, distinct in place of another, is impossible. Because identities are always relational and incomplete, as Lawrence Grossberg explains. I will also bring in Donna Haraway's post-anthropocentric framing on identities. Organisms are made, Haraway said. They are constructs of a world-changing kind. And she continues, any objects or persons can be reasonably thought of in terms of disassembly and reassembly. I see this disassembly, reassembly happening in the incident I mentioned earlier. During one of my first performances of Make Your Own Passport in two bordering cities of Windsor and Detroit, in Canada and the US respectively, a man barged into our booth in the downtown farmers market. He was clearly enraged. Well, we had rows and rows of passports assembly kits on one of the folding tables, and some participants making their own passports were having conversations on their new, randomly assigned citizenship and statelessness. The man saw us from a distance, rushed in, looking for someone to perhaps complain to. Others in the booth understandably shied away. No one dared to take a picture, of course, but as the artist who created the work, I felt responsible to engage. The man's booming voice reddened his own face. He angrily pointed at the passports and accused me of smuggling people across the border, which was, as a very appropriate mise-en-scene, just a 10-minute walk away, separating the city, which was Windsor, and the country, Canada, with their better social security system, from the bankrupt Detroit, USA. I tried to explain, this is an art project, which made the man more outraged. He jabbed me with a question most artists would fear. How can this be art? And stomped off, clutching his shopping bag of organic vegetables. I pondered his question for a while and distilled two observations on the incident. Firstly, the man's rage was a result of an aesthetic, in the sense I've defined, the opposite of an aesthetic. Secondly, the main producer of this aesthesis was my passports, the main materiality of the artwork being staged, the artwork's thingness. The passports within the context produce some kind of aesthesis that activates this man's senses deeply, making him emotional simply by the sight of them in a market booth a short distance away from the border. Invoked by this agentic thing in the assemblage, the enraged man poured out his anger on me, a complete stranger, apparently someone he thinks responsible for perhaps disassembling something in himself. The question he posed certainly reassembled something in me. So these are the two of the intermediaries of an aesthetic reassembling. Evocative aesthetic and the thing that produces it. The thing here doesn't only produce aesthesis, but further, through this aesthesis, the thing connects me with another actor. We become participants as the thing becomes an interface. Through this interfacing, associations are traced, identities are reassembled. This aesthetic interfacing is what makes a thing in common. To further discern the role of aesthetics in this microsift into becoming something in common between participants, I took my aesthetic object out of the equation in a study in Hong Kong. I looked for a naturally existing object in everyday life that could be a common object. Because of the prominence and distribution of cardboard waste in various places across the city, I suspected that it was a common object. The multiple locations hinted at mobility, and the actual movement of the cardboard waste being delivered to recycling points by waste collectors confirmed it. As I follow the cardboard waste, I see how the cardboard waste enters different regimes of value in the different nodes along the informal trade route. At the shop, it was waste, then a recycling commodity on the waste collectors' trolleys. Once it entered the Filipino domestic workers' node, where they spent time in the weekends, it became material for shelter, before shapes shifting again into becoming recycling commodity. Arjuna Padurai's description of these shifts of objects significant is widely cited. However, the micro shift of identities I experienced was distinctive. The moment I started drawing on the cardboard waste, their material and immaterial identity began shifting. Something that merely shielded us was transformed by aesthetics into being a gift, so full of meanings, imaginal and emotional, that one of my hosts requested to keep it to warm her tiny, cold room at her employer's house. In the next note, the drawings on the cardboard waste surface also raised questions and conversations. Along with changes in what I drew, they eventually made the recycling point workers aware, for the first time in a decade, of the existence of the Filipino domestic workers in another node of the route. This shift is in the understanding of the route they have been part of for so long was remarkable, and it was initiated by aesthetics. So that's what I call thing in common as a variant identity of star's boundary object. While star's boundary object tends to be disinterested in commonality, a thing in common reorganizes the social topology by deliberately bringing differences together through aesthetics reassembling. I would finish there this time. I look forward to our discussion at the end of this session.